We're on video.
Hello, hi everyone. So we just had another day at Die Geekdom Con. All right, we had a second RT40 panel today at noon, and we're just following up on a few things regarding discussion of the story Bible for Robotech II: The Sentinels. Here's
It's my copy.
That's right. Beats hard copy of.
I can't read PDFs. I have to have paper in front of me.
Yeah, whatever works, right? So anyway, I guess we'll start with what you suggested, like your first impressions.
Yeah, so my first impressions, obviously sort of the background, and we talked about this at the panel, is that you're the fan of the novels and the novel's interpretation of the Robotech universe. Right. I'm a fan of the show, principally.
Right.
And my thing as a purist, sort of the founder of the purist movement, was if you forget everything that the novels and comics said about whether they're trying to fix some of these, confusing or seemingly tangential aspects of the show, and they go off in their own direction. What if you follow the show and take it at its word? Where do you go with that? So I'm coming at this simultaneously as a perspective of someone who is a big fan of the show, who has issues with the novels because I'm a fan of the show, because there are things that are changed that I don't think, fits into, I think, my vision of Robotech as I understand it from the show. But also at the standpoint, I've been a Robotech fan for a very long time, since literally the codename Robotech. And I've sort of built my brand as a Robotech scholar. And so I come into this really not knowing. I've read the Sentinels synopses that Carl Macek put into Robotech Art 3. And in Robotech Art 3, he covers in some detail the first 10 episodes. Mm-hmm. And I believe I've seen some of the scripts of those early episodes. And skimmed through them. Right. And I forget who gave it to me. Either Prez Kennedy or David Ferris gave me access to those. And I don't know where they got them. And then in Robotech Art 3, after episode 10, Macek breaks it up into 5-episode weekly chunks and just summarizes it. And then I've read the novels, but I read them maybe 30 years ago when they first came out, and have not really given them a chance since. Yeah. So, and then I've been out of Robotech fandom for a long time, since about 2005. So about 20 years I got out of fandom, and I got back in when Chris Meadows passed away, and I got sort of Michael Corleone back in.
Yeah, right.
Try to get out, but they keep pulling me back in.
Yeah. Right.
And I'm coming at this from that perspective. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that has always struck me about the Sentinel story, in contrast to the show, and this being, starting with the McKinney version, which was the only version I knew, and then the Waltrip that followed after that, is how small the universe is. And to give an example of that, the Robotech Expeditionary Force, as described here, is only 10,000 men. And that includes, apparently, all the crews of the one ship, 10,000 men in one ship, sent off on a mission to browbeat and threaten, using gunboat diplomacy, the race that sent an armada of 4.8 million warships plus Britai's 1 million warships, average a mile long, to go blow up Earth and recover the SDF-1. And so there's this mismatch of scale. And so this permeates through the entire thing. Tyrol is one small town. The planet Garuda is one small village. The planet Carbonara.
Right.
Which is most delicious planets.
Yeah, I mean, it's a delicious tasting planet.
And we'll talk about the names later on. Is one small village with a prison camp on the outside of it. And so that was the first thing that really struck me, is how small it was. The second thing that struck me is, to my estimation, and I know there are fans that disagree with me, my sense of Robotech is that Robotech is a 3-generational story. And I always come to, I think it's Jaqui's speech in As You Like It. And it's all the world's a stage and the men and women only players. And the tale, and it talks about the ages of the stages of life. Right. But the thing is they have their entrances and their exits. And what I thought was one of the most fascinating things about Robotech for its time, and even storytelling generally, is that by virtue of how the show came into existence, Robotech's characters told their story, and then they got off the stage. And to contrast this with how Macek seems to have viewed Robotech, Macek seems to have viewed Robotech as Macross, plus. And that's how I describe it, as a player, a Macross plus. Yeah. That he sees Robotech as the Macross, the continuation of the story of the Macross characters, plus a few other people who show up.
Right.
And so among the human characters, there's an absolutely singular focus in this on Rick and Lisa and Min-Mei and Max and Miri. Max and Miri are kind of background characters at most in this. And Exodor and Britai is kind of a background character in this. And then of the other human characters who get any screen time at all are our new antagonist, Edwards.
Right.
His deputy and his deputy Adams, I believe. And then Jack and Karen get a lot of screen time, so they're almost the new main characters. And then Rem and Cabell, if you count them as human, and then the Sentinels characters. But there's almost total absence of minor characters. There doesn't seem to be any room in the way he's describing this for other people to be going on about their lives while these events are happening.
Right.
And so that's the second real big takeaway I get from this, it's a very self-contained story, and it reminds me a lot of very much of kids shows of its era. And because you have you're not expecting kids to see a big wide world. They're seeing these little worlds and these characters that are all tightly knit,
right,
and everything's wrapped up in a bow.
Yeah. I think there are what we had discussed before, like he was under sort of pressure to get this done, to get something together, to drum up some funding for it. So it's a bit, there's a time crunch factor.
There's certainly a possibility that he's focusing on the big strokes of the main characters he cares about.
Right.
But I do think that it does speak to his conceptualization of it, that it's not a big universe anymore. It's a universe that revolves still around Rick and Lisa.
Yeah.
And Min-Mei.
It seems like, it's, a default of his to focus on Macross, because it began his own personal journey into Robotech began with Macross before.
Right, and
the Macross series before Robotech was a thing with him.
Right, exactly. Yeah. That Robotech really was a vehicle to get Macross on the air. Right. And so I can't fault him if Macross was his interest. That Southern Cross and New Generation really get short shrift, and the only New Generation character that gets any screen time is Jonathan Wolfe.
Right.
And the other thing I did notice is, at the same time as he's focused on these characters, they don't seem particularly recognizable as themselves. Rick doesn't feel like Rick, and Lisa doesn't feel like Lisa. And Min-Mei is just a prize to be handed around from man to man. It's
interesting.
She's given to Jonathan Wolfe, and then she's given to T.R. Edwards, and then she's given eventually to Rem. And she doesn't have a lot of agency in her own right.
No, it's it seems to be a pattern of hers, continuation of a pattern of being mistreated, or just make the wrong choices when it comes to those kind of things.
Well, I agree in universe that there's that, but I think also there is something that she doesn't feel like a character very much in her own right. That from the standpoint of the writing, the standpoint of the conceptualization of the story, Rick has agency and Lisa have agency. They have a will and a desire to do certain things, and Min-Mei's character is simply reacting to the people desiring her, and that she has very little agency beyond that. Right. And I would think by this time, you would have come up with something that motivates her. And I think the only thing that she does is she's stuck in the RAF, and she creates a canteen for the soldiers where she can go and sing. So she goes and becomes the lounge singer that her music actually, I've said that, that Min-Mei's style is neo lounge. Just like we had our a big band revival in the 90s.
Right.
We can say in the Robotech universe, it was followed by a lounge revival. And so she goes and has her club and sings lounge music in the club.
Right. Yeah, it's anyway, yeah, just give me a moment to respond to some of the things you've talked about, because you have covered in a way pretty wide number of things, starting with your own reputation, perspective, just to speak for myself, and for how we're pretty accepting of different points of view, even though we may have certain or strong feelings about any part of the Robotech materials, and as a purist, I mean, I've heard some really interesting things that you've come up with to explain certain things that happen within the animation, and we we look at certain things that happen, and I think a lot of people will agree that things in the anime series are purely flubs that either generated from the original anime before it became Robotech, or maybe possibly developed from when it became Robotech, and which is understandable, because it's this journey of Robotech, starting by being three unrelated series at first, being tied together. You will have things that may not totally make sense, or may not be executed possibly in the right way, because they too had certain time constraints, when it comes to producing a series, and so for me, I guess, well, not necessarily guess, but I'm certain that when it comes to things that are presented from the animation, I'm not of the mind of okay, we have to accept everything that's presented to us, and part of that, when you thinking that is the way Robotech was put together, that some things just weren't making sense because of yes, time constraints, which it seems to be a theme with Robotech projects, even the ones we do like a lot, whether it's the anime series, the novels. The novels were under a really strict
time pressure,
in timetable to bang those books out, but I like so much from the novels. I mean, I do. There are instances where that does make me wonder here and there, even with the novel series that I like a lot. Anime series, for a record, I do love as much as other important parts of Robotech in other mediums, such as the novel series, such as certain comics by a certain author who shares my unfortunate initials. Anyway, I'll say that much. I'll let you figure out why I say unfortunate.
Unfortunate.
But anyway,
I like him. We're not talking about Bruce Lewis, are we?
Well, no. It's. Are you talking?
No, because he doesn't have your initials.
That's right.
A big such with a B.
Yeah. So yeah.
I mean, that's the only one that would be unfortunate.
Why I go by Mecha 8 and seemingly be the only one who uses that handle. I don't think anyone else has really, referred to me as that. But I like it, Mecha 8 as my handle. But anyway, so yeah, to me it's fascinating, just because after spending more time with Pete, which started in January, just to really see how involved he is with his fan fiction. It's fan fiction and just creating things, and then hearing about other things, and then you're talking about some kind of the lineages of Maryland that were from another fan fiction author.
This was Prez's concept.
It's Maryland. It's why? I'm thinking, what? So why Maryland? It's
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. Prez passed away before he could tell me that.
It's to me, it's really interesting, really involved how much just you as an example, have gone into just you know you know going about showing how high regard you have for the animated series.
Right.
Because I did ask you this one question, and feel free to answer it exactly the way I asked you for it. But when it comes to your fan fiction and being a purist, do you go about doing the way you do things, and in terms of interpreting and explaining things that may not make sense to any number of people, and just like me, okay, that's a flub, or that's okay, that was only mentioned one time, or maybe that hasn't had that kind of significance because it's only mentioned one time. I feel like, and yes, because the process of how the Robotech story came about, and in just the animated series alone, that I feel like a reinterpretation, or if someone wants to do something different from that, go away from that to tell a narrative that, or a version of Robotech story that does have a certain kind of internal logic that makes more sense. I don't have necessarily a problem with it as long as I like it or enjoy it. But it's like and others, I'm sure, I feel like you should be asked this question when it comes to your fan fiction, and and all these very intricate kind of explanations you have, coming from a purist point of view, or you doing it because of the mental exercise of it, or that you like the animated series that much?
I would say the answer is yes to both. And so I think, to clarify, when you refer to the fan fiction, you're not just referring to the narrative stories that I've written, Objective Reflex Point, and now Pioneer that I'm currently working on, and some of the other side stories in Pioneer that I'm working on. And some of the stuff that I was working with Prez before he passed away, which was, you referenced the Last Wolves of Maryland, which was going to be a history of the family, of the Wolf family, and I won't go into, but the details of how that ties into the show, because I know a little bit about where he was going. But yeah, so there is a certain fascination with, yes, you can say, all right, this line that doesn't quite make sense right now, I can kind of sweep it under the rug and simplify things, right? And this is what most fans have done, is they've sort of watched the show, and they didn't watch it in excruciating detail. I've had 40 years to rewatch it, and which is what the licensees have done. If it doesn't make immediate sense, to just kind of snip it off and move on. At once, there was the aspect of, I was told that, and this was on one of the old Usenet forums, that you can't make a coherent story from just the TV series without changing things, because Robotech was too internally inconsistent. And my reaction to that, being a contrarian, was,
okay, yeah,
is it though? And I've spent the last couple decades sort of really poring over the show and finding that the things that seem like contradictions, the things that seem like they don't make any sense, if you follow that loose thread rather than snip it off, in most cases you find that it doesn't connect to another loose thread in the show, but boy howdy, they run parallel.
Okay.
And so there is the intellectual exercise of, can I create a complex and deep universe by starting with the assumption that unless I'm stuck and cannot go otherwise, what you see and hear in the show is true. Doesn't mean characters are always telling the truth. Doesn't mean that they're always correct.
Right.
But the events that you see happened. The things that are said were said. I've got a little bit of a stumbling block on get a job.
Yeah, man, get a job, but somehow not when...
That just doesn't seem appropriate to say to your friend's mom under any set of circumstances.
Yeah, I'd love to hear some kind of explanation for that.
I'm working on it. I'll have one day.
But
there is that intellectual exercise aspect of it, and some of it may have started that way. But the more I delved into this show, and the more I started to find these small references that sort of fall off and never get pursued, the more I find there's the potential for a much bigger and more interesting backstory that I think, and I don't think, because Carl was so obsessed with Rick and Lisa and Min-Mei, that he didn't stop. And of course, Carl was on a deadline. Carl was rushing this out to get a story to his investors. But I think that as a purist, and I certainly, this is my own take on it. I think that the show, if you follow it to its logical conclusion, is a really big and interesting universe with all sorts of nooks and crannies to hide in. And as I spent more time studying and researching and writing sort of the non-narrative fan fiction, which is sort of like the essays of the Robotech technical files, the histories of the various mecha that like tie into little events that are implied but may not have happened, the races that are implied or mentioned but you never see, like the Disciples of Zor. Who are these guys? Right. And I have a whole backstory for them. Protoculture, how does it really work? Well, how do we piece together all the clues of what's going on in the show? And to me, it's not just an intellectual exercise, but the more you delve into Robotech, the more gems I find, and the more places to tell good stories are.
Okay.
And like, for example, and I don't want to get too far away from the Sentinel Story Bible, because that's really what we're here to talk about.
Right.
For example, if you really analyze the timeline of the show, and with regard specifically to the question of who knew anything about the Invid and when, no one knows anything about the Invid until well into their conquest of Earth. Leonard doesn't know who they are when they arrive. The 15th Squad barely knows anything by reputation. Musica's the only one who knows anything, but even then, she probably only knows by reputation. Mm-hmm. And Rick Hunter doesn't know who the Invid are when he's setting up Point K as an advanced attack base. But since the Invid arrived, there's been no one else to attack.
Right.
It seems pretty clear at this point that he is setting up Point K during the Invid conquest. Mm-hmm. Or having it set up. I think a good case could be made that Hunter was there himself, and it would be really cool if he were, because where else is Rick going to be but defending Earth?
Yeah.
But if no one knows who the Invid are until after the Invid finished conquering Earth, then yeah, you can still have a very Sentinels-like storyline. You can still have a really good storyline that follows the Sentinels in its broad strokes, and maybe make it bigger, make the number of worlds into the thousands and the number of troops, and make Earth more of a, because we've got Robotech factories, make Earth into the arsenal of democracy. You can tell a really good story though doing the Sentinels, but you've got to start it later, right? And once you've done that, then you're asking, well, what the heck were they doing between when they thought they were going to go to Tyrol and when the RAF gets all tied up and can't send troops back to help the Southern Cross? Until Mind Games, when they start sending waves back, which again is another thing that's mentioned in the show, it's forgotten. Mm-hmm. So I think it's both. I love the show because this intellectual exercise of can you make the show internally consistent without trimming off any of these weird little details led me to a place where I'm seeing, like I said, nooks and crannies within the Robotech universe that are utterly unexplored. And while I do enjoy the McKinney novels, I enjoyed reading them. I think Jim is a great writer. I've enjoyed my relationship with him. I think that there's another version of Robotech that maybe kind of speaks to some of our sort of older sensibilities. Now we're graying old men, and we've seen The Expanse, and we've seen Babylon 5, and we've seen Andor, and maybe there's a story in there, a world that's deeper that we can explore.
Yeah, it's for me, it's I guess I'm reminded of like when I first went on the internet to share my views, my take on the materials. In a way, it was very much a response to a lot of purism. The purist kind of take, and where I'm coming from, and I'm a newly debuted term. If I'm going to be labeled, I think I've settled on, for now at least, an expansionist. I'm an expansionist. I prefer that over inclusionist. Maybe inclusionist these days is not doing so well. Some broader kind of discussions these days in general. And,
Well, expansionist sounds like you're trying to conquer territory.
yeah, well, still, I'll
good luck.
But it's a lot of the stuff like Star Wars expanded universe.
Right. Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah.
It's that kind of take.
Right.
Expansionists. Okay, so
and the expanded universe has a mixed relationship with continuity,
right?
Because there's so much to it that it's very hard for everything to remain in canon.
Yeah,
right?
in canon,
in their own its own internal.
Right,
canon.
right. I mean, even with the Star Wars expanded universe before Disney bought Lucasfilm, there were inconsistencies between the comic books and the novels.
Right, and I understand that the philosophy there, and this I got from Eckhart's Ladder, which is a great channel for Star Wars fans, is that newer material takes priority over older material.
Yeah,
and in that,
right.
and I think that's the way people have treated Robotech, and I understand you come at this as a reaction to purism, and
yeah, but it's like, I mean, well, at least my public, my public participation.
Right.
You can't like a webpage on the internet that debuted in the '90s,
right?
As public,
right?
But it's like, but these views were there, before I, so to speak, went public, and started my own interactions or communication with Jim Lucino. Later than you did, but yeah, and
not much later.
But
it's about the same time.
Yeah, well, late enough not to be included in any kind of like shout out or dedication.
Yeah, fair enough.
All the novels were all published.
Sorry,
it's all right. But Jim made up for that in a big way, and I'll leave it at that. and in recent events, but anyway, so seeing the fan fiction and knowing how involved it's in a way, it's like I have a sort of response that I haven't really acted on yet. I mean, I have, I guess, in a way, dabbled with fan fiction by executing this one idea, which I shared with you tonight about like writing a mock article about
not a mock article, an in-universe article.
In-universe,
and a diegetic article.
Diegetic article. Okay, of Rick and Lisa's wedding using dates that Jim had written in,
from the perspective of a news report.
I wrote it from exactly from the perspective of a news reporter.
From the human interest section, the People magazine type.
Yeah, exactly. It was very much.
I think that's a great idea. I think that's a really fun way to humanize that moment in the story.
Yeah, because the People magazine is something I'm familiar with by going to the dentist.
Right.
And from way back when, it's like, oh, People magazine, pick it up, okay,
right.
And that's sort of was the inspiration. That's why my magazine is called Sentience. You get it, guys? Hey. And then see that sci-fi feel. So, and then at the same time. So anyway, but yeah, man, it's like that's my little dabbling with fan fiction. But then there are thoughts of okay, a complement of troops were left on Garuda, and we never really hear any more about them. And we learn about that through the novels. Okay, Garuda happened, but the REFers / Sentinels, they left some, REF troops there, there. And then I think there's a story there. I think there's a story there. And also, the local worlds are called local for a reason. There are other worlds too, and they do touch upon them
in the novels.
Specifically in a circle.
Right.
There's like a meeting of different planets that
and that's something that McKinney developed because that's not in the story Bible.
Right.
That's all new stuff.
Yeah. So right. And speaking of the story Bible, I guess we should
get back to that. I do want to. I'm not quite push back on a couple things, but I think absolutely there's so much room in the Robotech universe for new stories, and the difference between a purist and an expansionist, as you call it. I believe Stan Bundy coined the concept. The term universalist, that he sees all Robotech media as universally true, and that the Robotech story is somewhere in the middle of all that. And I think that's a perfectly valid approach as well. I think there's so many good stories to be told.
Yeah.
But what we need to do, and I think maybe this is, if people are sort of open about this, state your premise. What what are my fundamental assumptions when going into this, writing this story? And I tell you, I'm writing this story from the perspective of the novel's universe, and then go off from there. And I, as a reader, know what to expect. I know what information is true and what information is not true in that universe, and then I can proceed from there. And if I say I'm writing this from a purist perspective, you can go in. I was like, okay, everything in here is going to be striving to be 100% consistent with the TV show. And while I may reference the novels or reference characters from the novels or ideas from the novels, they're going to be subtly altered or grossly altered to be so that they fit with the show. But that doesn't mean I'm saying I can do better than the novels. It means I'm trying to fit this idea that I like into this premise that I'm operating from and tell that same story in the way that it was intended, but within this different context. So that's, I absolutely go write all the fan fiction in the world, because I think that's great. I think the more fan fiction, the better. And the better the fan fiction, the more. So
it goes back to something we discussed about different perspectives, different ways people see Robotech, based on what catches your eye, that certain details of the material. And so, one perspective is no more valid than another one's perspective.
And so just state your premises, and as a reader, I can say either, well, this isn't going to interest me, or it's going to interest me, but I've got to go into with the right mindset.
Right.
And the other thing, and this is where it's going to be a little pushback, but it's not quite. I sort of want, pushback seems harsh. The funny thing is you feel like you are reacting to purism, which was becoming the dominant school of Robotech thought at the time. But purism grew out of a reaction to people saying, hey, you guys are being harsh on the novels. The novels, everything Robotech is good because Robotech's over and we're only getting this new stuff. And we're saying, there's some things about the novels that we question. Like, one of the first things, and I think this is now overblown as an example, but one of the first things that people glommed onto were thinking caps.
Right.
And not to get into the thinking cap debate, but this is one of those things that you have people say that we feel this is fundamentally inconsistent with some of the details of the show. And so the people who are saying this were like, well, you just got to ignore the show because the show can't be its own universe because it's too inconsistent. And so purism grew out of a reaction from this sort of, and that's not even a philosophical expansionism or universalism. It's just sort of a default.
Yeah.
And so purism came as a reaction to that. And then what you're talking about comes a reaction to purism. And you know what? There's no reason that these philosophies of storytelling can't exist simultaneously.
Can't exist, can't coexist.
Exactly. And can't inform one another.
Right. Well, I mean, beginning in January, we, as I made a post of, because, Jeremy Brennan took this very nice picture of our very first panel of different kinds of fans. Mm-hmm. And there were, purists, there were, I'm not even sure I like expansionists as a term.
We'll shed that.
We'll shed that. But inclusionist is like...
I don't like purist either, honestly.
Yeah.
I did not pick that name.
But it's like, I guess I got tired of using inclusionist.
Yeah.
And because someone else on some message board years ago came up with it, and it's like, you know what? I guess I might be an inclusionist, but the thing is, I don't include everything.
Right.
Everything that's out there.
And universalist doesn't work because that's a religious denomination. So they're already universal. They're also mostly Unitarians, but that's a different story.
But yeah, it's like, there's room for everyone, essentially at the table. And when it comes to perspectives, viewpoints, and such, and it's a really good thing to keep that in mind. We're much older than we were way back when, so we're
either wiser or we're more tired.
Yeah, we're more tired.
Either way, we're not fighting anymore.
Yeah, we're not fighting because it's too much work.
I would like to say that under my characteristic Hawaiian shirt, I am wearing one of Bryant's Support the Novels Timeline T-shirts, and so for all those, I got into the worst flame wars with in the old days, supporting the TV show's timeline and deriving a timeline from the TV show that disagrees with the novels. I don't know that this is so much of an apology, so much as at least a fig leaf.
Fig leaf. I'll take whatever exclamation, as long as you're wearing that shirt.
And yet it's still 2052.
It's progress. It's 2052. Yeah, right.
So, let's get back to.
That's right. The Sentinels Bible. Story Bible. Okay, maybe I should try to.
Well, why don't I read a little bit about? Why don't I read my foreword
go ahead.
that puts this thing into context? And unfortunately, this is not yet available for fans. There's some concern about Harmony Gold getting upset about us distributing this widely. We want to sort of test the waters, and then maybe one day, as a resource, honestly, if Harmony Gold were smart, they would license somebody to print this and sell it and make money off of it. And they would probably need to do as a photocopy, because one of the most important things in this is, well, you'll see this in my introduction. This is the introduction I wrote for the limited distribution that I've given so far. Robotech: The Sentinels, original story Bible by Carl Macek, edited by Peter Walker. And the editing, you'll see, there's very little editing. Likely produced by Robotech creator Carl Macek beginning in the fall of 1985, this document was given by Carl to James Luceno, one half of the writing team known as Jack McKinney. James has kindly made this document available for posterity for a deeper understanding of the history of the development of this unfinished series and how it informed his and Brian Daley's writing process in the creation of their novelization of the story. Of the document, James writes, Carl was very dismissive of it. Even though it was meant to serve eventually as a template/Bible for the scriptwriters, he told me that he had banged it out quickly to assure potential investors/advertisers that he had 65 episodes worth of Sentinels material, and that I should feel free to alter, ignore, or discard as Brian and I saw fit. I felt then, and now, that he undervalued what he had created, and Brian and I made use of almost everything he set down in one way or another. I received the book from Carl on June 3rd, 1987, at Harmony Gold's offices in Sunset, Los Angeles. I'm not sure if a copy was ever given or sent to Brian. If so, it might be among the archive material at Jersey City College, now University. I wonder if there are any other copies gathering dust somewhere in Harmony Gold. And one might wonder if other copies, for example, fell in the hands of the Wall Trips. So you might be worth asking.
Right.
And if anyone goes to Jersey City University, look around about that. Resuming, all handwritten marginalia are James Luceno's own notes, produced as he was preparing to adapt the material for his novelization. I have preserved all entries but one. On the back of the first page, the orphaned word ensign is written without context. The last page has a much longer note that I have scanned and included. In two places, Carl Macek has skipped a page number in his plot summaries. In both cases, the flow of the surrounding text appears to be unbroken, and there is therefore no evidence of missing pages. I have added dummy pages to indicate these skipped page numbers. I have applied the absolute minimal editor's hand in preparing this document for future research, adding only this foreword and the missing page number notes. And then, as you get into it, almost immediately, and I'm going to hold this up to the screen to see if you can see it. You can see all these handwritten notes that are Jim Luceno's. And I had to ask him if they're all his, because you can see, and even to a certain extent on the first page, but certainly more so in later places, you have places where the marginalia are, like for example here, would come out visible. The marginalia are in block print, but the marginalia on this page are in cursive. And I had to ask Jim, are those both you? And he said yes. He alternated between block print and cursive. And this is big, and that's a little disappointing in the sense that it would have been interesting to see Brian and Jim's notes, but this is all Jim Luceno's.
Yeah, and from what I understand is he's not totally sure that if Brian
ever got a copy,
or if, he might very well have gotten a copy. Right?
It seems likely.
Yeah,
it seems likely considering that he and Brian were collaborating on these books, and that was when you talk about first impressions. And the one thing I think I left off was that, insofar as I remember the Sentinels books, and it's been a very long time since I've read them, he is being authentically true.
just a moment.
And we may have to plug our camera in. He may be authentically true. You want to stop it and restart with a power?